Admiral Jennifer Cole stood on the bridge of the supercarrier Defiance and watched as the last organized Zephyrian resistance crumbled beneath the overwhelming power of the human fleet. Jennifer had been in command of the final assault phase, and she felt a mixture of satisfaction and horror as she witnessed the complete destruction of an enemy that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. The Zephyrian fleet that had entered human space with such confidence was now reduced to scattered wreckage drifting through the void. Only a dozen alien ships remained operational, and those were so badly damaged that they could barely maintain life support. War Commander Thexvar had lost over 90% of his invasion force in less than 6 hours of fighting. Captain Steve Anderson piloted the experimental ship Horizon's Edge through the debris field that had once been the Zephyrian fleet, and he marveled at the effectiveness of human weapons. The alien vessels had been built to withstand the forces of interstellar war, but they had been torn apart like paper toys by technology that the Zephyrians could not even understand. The quantum displacement drives that powered the Horizon's Edge allowed the ship to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, and this impossible capability had driven many alien captains to madness during the battle. Steve had watched Zephyrian commanders simply stop fighting when they realized they were facing an enemy whose technology might as well have been magic. Dr. Patricia Murphy established contact with the surviving Zephyrian officers and began the process of formal surrender negotiations. Patricia spoke to the aliens in their own language, and her words carried the weight of 500,000 years of human preparation. The psychological impact of her message was more devastating than any weapon could have been. "Your empire has ruled the galaxy for millions of years," Patricia said, as her image appeared on the damaged screens of the remaining alien ships. "But you have never faced an enemy that spent 500,000 years preparing for your arrival." War Commander Thexvar listened to the human woman's words and felt his mind struggling to process the implications of what she was saying. The idea that an entire civilization had dedicated itself to preparing for the Zephyrian Empire's arrival for such an impossible length of time was beyond his ability to comprehend. The alien commander had conquered dozens of star systems and enslaved countless species, but he had never encountered resistance like this. The humans had not simply fought back against the invasion, but had created an elaborate trap that had taken hundreds of millennia to construct. The level of patience and planning required for such an undertaking was terrifying to a species that thought in terms of quick conquests and immediate results. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty and watched as Zephyrian soldiers on Earth's surface laid down their weapons in massive numbers. The alien ground forces that had been so confident just hours before were now surrendering to human troops whose equipment made them appear to be supernatural beings. The powered armor worn by human soldiers allowed them to move faster and hit harder than any biological creature could manage, and their weapons fired streams of energy that could cut through solid rock. The Zephyrians had thought their own technology was advanced, but compared to human equipment, it looked like primitive stone tools. Admiral Rick Barnes sat in his command center on Mars and monitored the surrender of the remaining alien forces throughout the solar system. Rick had been planning this operation for over a century, and the complete success of the human victory exceeded even his most optimistic projections. The Zephyrian Empire had been utterly defeated, and their survivors would carry word of humanity's power back to the rest of the galaxy. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster watched from Luna Base Alpha as the holographic projectors that had hidden human civilization for thousands of years were finally shut down. Amy had spent her entire adult life maintaining the illusion that Earth was a dead world, and seeing the planet revealed in its true glory was overwhelming. Cities that had been hidden beneath the surface rose into the sunlight for the first time in centuries. The Psychological Warfare Division, led by Commander Maria Santos, began broadcasting messages to the surviving Zephyrians, and the content of those transmissions would haunt the aliens for the rest of their lives. Maria's team had studied Zephyrian culture for decades, and they knew exactly how to break the spirit of a species that had never known defeat. You believed you were the apex predators of the galaxy. Maria's voice echoed through the damaged alien ships. But you are children playing with toys compared to what humanity has become. War Commander Thexvar tried to maintain his composure as he listened to the human messages, but his hands were shaking and his voice cracked when he attempted to give orders to his remaining subordinates. The alien commander had led successful invasions of 47 star systems, but he had never faced an enemy that had been watching and preparing for his arrival for longer than his entire species had possessed interstellar travel. Captain Paul Mitchell received reports from his fighter squadrons that all remaining Zephyrian vessels had either surrendered or been destroyed. Paul's pilots had achieved total victory without losing a single human life, and their success demonstrated the overwhelming technological superiority that 500,000 years of preparation had given humanity. The mobile fortress, New Olympus, moved through the wreckage of the alien fleet like a mountain walking among pebbles, and its weapons remained charged and ready to destroy any Zephyrian ship that showed signs of resistance. Captain Alex Rodriguez commanded firepower that could crack planets, and the mere presence of his vessel was enough to keep the surviving aliens in a state of complete submission. Dr. Patricia Murphy began the formal interrogation of captured Zephyrian officers, and what she learned confirmed everything that human intelligence had suspected about the alien empire. The Zephyrians were a conquering species that had built their civilization on the enslavement of other races, but they had never encountered serious resistance until today. "How long have you been watching us?" War Commander Thexvar asked during his interrogation, and his voice was barely a whisper. The alien commander looked like he had aged decades in the past few hours, and his eyes held the haunted expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had been shattered. Patricia looked at the broken alien officer and felt a moment of sympathy for a creature whose entire worldview had been destroyed in a single day. The Zephyrians had thought they were the masters of the galaxy, but they had discovered that they were nothing more than another conquered species waiting for their turn to be subjugated. "We detected your empire 500,000 years ago," Patricia said calmly. "From that moment, every human who has ever lived has dedicated their existence to preparing for this day." The revelation hit Thexvar like a physical blow, and he slumped in his chair as the full implications of what the human was saying penetrated his consciousness. An entire species had spent 500,000 years getting ready for his arrival, and every aspect of their civilization had been designed around the single goal of defeating the Zephyrian Empire. Admiral Carl Jenkins broadcast the final message to the surviving alien ships, and his words were transmitted throughout Zephyrian space to warn the rest of their empire about what they had encountered in the human solar system. Carl's voice was calm and measured, but his words carried the authority of a species that had just demonstrated its overwhelming superiority. "Return to your home worlds, and tell your people what you have seen here," Carl said as his image appeared on every functioning Zephyrian screen. "Tell them that humanity is no longer hiding, and that any species that threatens our worlds will face the same fate that you have suffered." The psychological impact of the human victory was spreading beyond The solar system, as surviving Zephyrian ships, began broadcasting warnings to their home worlds. The aliens were reporting that they had encountered a species whose technology seemed to violate the laws of physics, and whose patience exceeded anything they had thought possible. Captain Helen Brooks stood on the bridge of the Earth's Vengeance and watched as the last Zephyrian transport ships prepared to leave human space. Helen had waited 30 years for this battle, and seeing the enemy flee in complete defeat was more satisfying than she had ever imagined it could be. The alien evacuation ships were loaded with survivors who would spend the rest of their lives telling stories about the day their mighty empire was humbled by a species they had thought was extinct. The Zephyrians who departed Earth carried with them the knowledge that there were forces in the universe far more powerful and patient than they had ever dreamed. Major Susan Wright led her Special Forces teams through the abandoned alien bases, and marveled at how quickly the invaders had collapsed once their technological superiority was revealed to be an illusion. The Zephyrians had built their empire on the assumption that they possessed the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, but human technology had made their equipment look like primitive artifacts. Lieutenant Laura Davis sent the final communication to the departing alien ships, and her message would be remembered throughout Zephyrian space for generations to come. Laura's words were simple, but Fleet Admiral Carl Jenkins stood in the command center of the super dreadnought Olympia and raised his hand to give the signal that would change the course of galactic history. Carl had been waiting for this moment for over 200 years, and his voice was steady as he spoke the words that would end humanity's long hiding. All ships decloak and engage the enemy. Across the solar system, thousands of human warships shimmered into visibility like ghosts becoming solid. The Zephyrian fleet found itself surrounded by enemies that had appeared from empty space, and War Commander Thexvar felt his blood freeze as he realized that his entire invasion force was trapped. The alien sensors screamed warnings as human. Ships materialized in every direction, but the readings made no sense. The computer systems insisted that the space around Earth had been empty just moments before, but now it was filled with vessels that appeared to be built from technology far beyond anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Captain Paul Mitchell felt the deck of the New Yorktown vibrate as the carrier launched its first wave of fighters. The small craft streaked toward the alien fleet with impossible speed, and their plasma cannons began tearing through Zephyrian shields like they were made of paper. Paul watched the tactical display and saw alien ships dying faster than his computers could count them. War Commander Thexvar grabbed the communication console on his bridge and screamed orders at his subordinates, but many of his ships were no longer responding. The human electronic warfare systems had been jamming Zephyrian communications for hours, and the alien fleet was beginning to break apart as individual captains lost contact with their commanders. The human fighters danced through space with agility. That seemed to violate the laws of physics, and their weapons cut through alien armor like it was made of cloth. Lieutenant Sarah Mills piloted her interceptor through the heart of the enemy formation and watched Zephyrian capital ships explode around her. Sarah had trained for this battle her entire life, but the reality was more overwhelming than anything she had imagined. Captain Helen Brooks gave the order to fire, and the Earth's Vengeance unleashed its main battery at a Zephyrian dreadnought that was trying to escape toward the outer system. The quantum torpedoes struck their target with the force of a small star, and the alien ship simply ceased to exist. Helen had dreamed of this moment for decades, but the actual destruction was so complete that she felt sick watching it. The mobile Fortress New Olympus emerged from the asteroid belt like a mountain come to life, and its appearance on the battlefield sent waves of terror through the Zephyrian ranks. Captain Alex Rodriguez commanded weapons that could crack planets, and the alien ships that tried to oppose him were vaporized before they could fire a shot. On the surface of Earth, the explosive charges that Major Susan Wright had planted began, detonating throughout the alien bases. The Zephyrians found themselves under attack from within their own fortifications, as hidden tunnels opened to reveal human soldiers in powered armor. The aliens had been confident in their ground positions, but now they were fighting for their lives against enemies that seemed to appear from nowhere. Commander Rachel Stone led the communication corps in broadcasting humanity's message to the remaining alien ships, and her words were transmitted on every frequency that the Zephyrians used. Rachel's voice was calm and clear as she spoke the words that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. You came to conquer the dead, but now you face the living. The psychological impact of the message was devastating to an alien species that had never encountered serious resistance. The Zephyrians had conquered 47 star systems and enslaved dozens of different species, but they had never faced an enemy that had been preparing for their arrival for hundreds of thousands of years. Admiral Tony Clark coordinated the systematic destruction of the alien fleet from his flagship in the asteroid belt, and he watched with grim satisfaction as human weapons proved their superiority over Zephyrian technology. The aliens had thought they were the apex predators of the galaxy, but they were learning that there were things in the universe far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. War Commander Thexavar stared at his tactical display and felt his sanity beginning to crack under the weight of what he was seeing. The human ships moved with impossible coordination, and their weapons seemed to bend the laws of physics. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for millions of years, but these humans were making his forces look like primitives, armed with sticks and stones. Colonel Joe Barnes led the ground assault that revealed the true nature of human civilization, and he watched with fierce pride as the hidden cities began rising from beneath Earth's surface. Central Park in New Manhattan unfolded like a massive flower to reveal gleaming spires and bustling streets. The Zephyrians, who had been walking on what they thought was a dead world, realized they had been standing on top of a thriving civilization. The human plasma cannons fired streams of energy that burned hotter than the cores of stars, and the alien ships they struck were reduced to clouds of glowing gas. Captain Steve Anderson piloted the experimental vessel Horizon's Edge through the battle and demonstrated technology that allowed his ship to appear in multiple locations simultaneously. The Zephyrians could not understand what they were seeing, and many of their captains simply stopped fighting as their minds refused to accept the impossible. Dr. Patricia Murphy established communication with the surviving Zephyrian commanders and spoke to them in their own language with perfect fluency. Patricia had been studying alien culture for decades, and she knew exactly what words would have the greatest psychological impact on a species that had never known defeat. "We have been watching your empire for 500,000 years, Patricia said, as her image appeared on alien view screens throughout the system. "We know everything about you, and we have been preparing for this moment since before your civilization learned to build starships." The revelation that humanity had been aware of the Zephyrian Empire for so long was more terrifying to the aliens than any weapon could have been. The idea that an entire species had dedicated itself to preparing for their arrival for hundreds of millennia was beyond their comprehension. The human ships that had been hiding in the outer system began moving toward Earth, and their weapons reached out across millions of miles to destroy fleeing alien vessels. The Zephyrians found that there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide from an enemy that controlled every cubic meter of space in the solar system. Captain Jake Morrison felt tears streaming down his face as he watched the USS Liberty fire its weapons in anger for the first time in 5 centuries. Jake had been born on this ship and had spent his entire life waiting for this moment, but the reality of battle was more intense than any simulation could have prepared him for. The alien ground forces that had been occupying human cities found themselves fighting a war they could not possibly win. Human soldiers emerged from hidden tunnels and bunkers that the Zephyrians had never detected, and their weapons cut through alien armor like it was made of cardboard. The invaders who had been so confident just hours before were now running for their lives through streets they had thought they controlled. Admiral Rick Barnes watched the battle from his command center on Mars and felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as he saw the plan he had spent over a century developing finally come to fruition. The human race had sacrificed everything to prepare for this day, and now their patience was being rewarded with total victory over an enemy that had seemed invincible. The Zephyrian fleet that had entered the solar system with over 200 ships was reduced to less than 30 vessels in the first hour of fighting, and those survivors were badly damaged and unable to coordinate their actions. War Commander Thexvar realized that his invasion force was doomed, and he began sending desperate messages to the Zephyrian homeworlds warning them about the humans. Commander Lisa Hayes monitored the alien communications from her station on. Pluto and she heard the terror in Zephyrian voices as they tried to describe what was happening to them. The aliens were reporting that humanity possessed technology that seemed like magic and weapons that violated everything they thought they knew about physics. The human cities that rose from beneath Earth's surface were more advanced than anything the Zephyrians had ever seen, and their appearance completed the psychological destruction of the invading force. The aliens realized they had not conquered a dead world, but had instead walked into a trap that had been 500,000 years in the making. Captain Paul Mitchell received reports that his fighters had achieved complete air superiority over Earth and that the remaining alien ground forces were surrendering in massive numbers. The Zephyrians, who had thought they were conquering primitives, were instead being captured by soldiers whose equipment made them look like gods of war. The battle that humanity had been preparing for during 500,000 years was ending in total victory. But the cost in Zephyrian lives was staggering. Admiral Carl Jenkins looked at the tactical display and saw that only a handful of alien ships remained operational, and those were so badly damaged that they posed no threat to anyone. Admiral Tony Clark received the coded transmission from General Patterson at exactly midnight ship time, and he knew that Phase 2 of the operation was about to begin. Tony had been waiting for this moment for over 40 years, and his hands trembled slightly as he opened the sealed orders that would transform the hidden fleet from watchers into hunters. Battle Group 7 consisted of 30 ships scattered throughout the asteroid belt, and each vessel had been modified for stealth operations that would have been impossible with conventional technology. The ships could move through space without leaving any trace of their passage, and their weapons could strike targets from distances that made retaliation impossible. Captain Helen Brooks stood on the bridge of the Earth's Vengeance and felt her heart racing as she read the same orders that Admiral Clark had received. Helen had served in the Hidden Fleet for her entire adult life, but she had never fired a shot in anger. Today that would change, and she wondered if she was truly ready for what was about to happen. The first targets were the Zephyrian picket ships that patrolled the outer edges of the solar system. These vessels served as early warning systems for the main fleet, and their destruction would blind the aliens to any movement in deep space. The attack had to be perfectly coordinated and completely silent, or the entire plan would fail. Commander Danny Price piloted his stealth destroyer through the darkness between Mars and Jupiter and approached the first target from an angle that would hide his ship behind a large asteroid. Danny had been practicing this maneuver for 20 years, but doing it for real felt completely different. The alien ship ahead of him contained over 300 Zephyrian soldiers, and in a few minutes they would all be dead. Major Susan Wright led her Special Forces team through the ventilation shafts of the alien base in what had once been Central Park, and she moved with the silent precision of a predator stalking its prey. Susan's team wore powered armor that made them stronger and faster than any normal human, and their weapons could cut through alien metal like it was paper. The Zephyrians had no idea that death was approaching them from multiple directions at once. War Commander Thexavar sat in his command center aboard the flagship and reviewed reports from his mining operations. The planet was yielding fewer resources than expected, but the conquest was proceeding smoothly with no signs of resistance anywhere in the system. Admiral Clark gave the signal, and 30 human ships fired their weapons simultaneously at targets spread across millions of miles of space. The Zephyrian picket ships died instantly as quantum torpedoes tore through their hulls and antimatter charges vaporized their power systems. The aliens had no time to send distress signals or even understand what was happening to them. Captain Alex Rodriguez felt the new Olympus shudder slightly as its massive engines came online for the first time in over a century. The mobile fortress had been drifting silently through the asteroid belt, but now it began moving toward the inner solar system on a course that would bring it into position for the final phase of the battle. Navigator Beth Daniels monitored the gravitational sensors that detected the movement of every large object in the solar system, and she watched as the pieces of humanity's trap began falling into place. The timing had to be perfect, because the aliens would only remain unaware of their danger for a few more hours. The Special Forces teams struck at the alien ground installations with devastating precision, and the Zephyrian soldiers died without ever seeing their attackers. Susan Wright moved through the enemy base like a ghost, and her team eliminated guards and technicians with weapons that made no sound. The aliens simply collapsed, and their comrades assumed they had suffered equipment failures or medical emergencies. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster monitored the alien communications from her control room on Luna Base, and she heard the first signs of confusion beginning to spread through the Zephyrian ranks. Equipment was failing throughout their fleet, and ground teams were reporting strange malfunctions that their engineers could not explain. The human sabotage operations were designed to look like natural system failures, and the aliens initially blamed their problems on the harsh environment of what they believed was a dead world. The Zephyrians had encountered similar difficulties on other conquered planets, and they saw no reason to suspect that an enemy was actively working against them. Captain Paul Mitchell commanded the carrier New Yorktown from its hiding place in the shadow of Saturn, and he watched his pilots perform final preparations for the attack runs that would begin the open phase of the battle. Paul's fighters were armed with weapons that could destroy alien capital ships with single shots, but they remained hidden until the moment came to reveal humanity's true power. Dr. Patricia Murphy worked in her underground laboratory and analyzed the Zephyrian technology that the Special Forces teams were bringing back from their raids. Patricia had discovered several critical weaknesses in alien systems, and her research would give human weapons a decisive advantage when the final battle began. The Zephyrian mining operations continued, but the aliens were becoming increasingly frustrated with the equipment failures that seemed to plague every aspect of their work. Drill bits broke for no apparent reason, and power systems shut down randomly. The alien engineers worked around the clock to repair the damage, but new problems appeared faster than old ones could be fixed. Commander Kevin Walsh piloted reconnaissance, drones that shadowed the alien patrols and recorded everything they did. Kevin had been watching the Zephyrians for weeks, and he knew their routines better than they knew them themselves. When the time came to strike, the aliens would find that humanity knew exactly where to hit them for maximum effect. War Commander. Thexvar began to suspect that something was wrong, but he could not identify the source of his unease. The conquest was proceeding according to plan, and his forces controlled all the major population centers on the planet's surface. Yet equipment continued to fail, and his patrols reported strange energy readings that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Admiral Rick Barnes sat in his command center on Mars and watched the tactical display that showed the positions of every ship in the hidden fleet. Rick had been planning this operation for over a century, and every detail had been calculated and rehearsed countless times. The moment of truth was approaching, and he felt the weight of 500,000 years of preparation pressing down on his shoulders. The alien fleet remained in orbit around Earth, but many of the smaller vessels had been dispatched to investigate the equipment failures that were occurring throughout the system. The Zephyrians were spreading their forces thin as they tried to understand what was causing their technology to malfunction. Captain Jake Morrison received orders to begin moving the USS Liberty into attack position, and he felt a mixture of excitement and terror as his ship left its hiding place for the first time in 3 centuries. Jake had been born on the Liberty and had never known any other home, but today he would finally see the ship fulfill the purpose for which it had been built. The human ships moved through space like shadows, and their advanced stealth systems made them invisible to even the most sophisticated Zephyrian sensors. The aliens had no idea that thousands of enemy vessels were converging on their positions from every direction at once. Major Susan Wright led her team deeper into the alien base and planted explosive charges that would detonate when the open battle began. The Zephyrians would find themselves under attack from within their own fortifications when humanity finally revealed its presence. Susan's people had been training for this mission their entire lives, and they moved through the enemy installation like they owned it. The alien communication networks began experiencing mysterious interference, and messages between ships were delayed or lost entirely. The Zephyrians blamed solar radiation and electromagnetic anomalies, but the truth was that human electronic warfare specialists were systematically dismantling their ability to coordinate their forces. Commander Lisa Hayes monitored the deep space sensors from her station on Pluto and detected the approach of additional alien ships from outside the solar system. The Zephyrians were calling for reinforcements to help them understand what was happening to their equipment, but the new arrivals would only provide more targets for the hidden fleet. Captain Helen Brooks felt the Earth's vengeance tremble as its weapons systems came online for the first time in decades. The ship's main guns could punch holes through solid rock from millions of miles away, and its missile systems carried warheads that burned hotter than the surface of the sun. Helen had dreamed of this moment for 30 years, and now it was finally here. The Zephyrian ground forces began consolidating their positions as reports of equipment failures reached epidemic proportions throughout their ranks. War Commander. Thexvar ordered his engineers to conduct a complete analysis of all systems, but they found nothing wrong with their technology. The failures appeared to be random and inexplicable. Admiral Clark watched as the last of the alien picket ships was destroyed by long-range fire from his hidden vessels, and he knew that the Zephyrians were now completely blind to what was happening in the outer solar system. The enemy fleet was trapped and isolated, and Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster stood in the control room of Luna Base Alpha and watched as the Zephyrian fleet entered Earth orbit. The alien ships were massive and dark against the star field, and their weapons bristled from every surface. Amy had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment, but seeing the enemy ships with her own eyes still made her stomach clench with fear. The base was hidden beneath the surface of the moon, and its existence was concealed by the same holographic projectors that had been hiding human civilization for thousands of years. To the aliens, Luna appeared to be nothing more than a dead rock orbiting a dead planet. They had no idea that beneath the dusty surface lay one of humanity's most important military installations. All projection systems are operating at full power, reported Sergeant Kevin Walsh from his station at the main control panel. Kevin had been born on Luna Base and had never seen the surface of Earth with his own eyes. Like most humans of his generation, he had grown up knowing that his world was hidden, and that discovery meant death for everyone he knew. Amy nodded and turned her attention to the main display screen that showed the alien fleet in perfect detail. The Zephyrian ships were arranged in a standard invasion formation with the largest vessels at the center and smaller escort ships spread out in a protective screen. War Commander Thexvar was following the same pattern that the aliens had used to conquer dozens of other worlds. The holographic projectors that concealed Earth had been operating for so long that they had become part of the planet itself. Massive generators buried deep in the crust-powered electromagnetic fields that made the world appear lifeless from space. The oceans looked poisoned, and the continents were covered with what appeared to be the ruins of a long-dead civilization. Commander Maria Santos sat at her workstation in the Psychological Warfare Division and monitored the alien communications. The Zephyrians were using standard military frequencies, and their messages were being decoded by computer systems that had been analyzing alien languages for centuries. Maria could understand every word they spoke, and what she heard made her angry. "They are calling Earth a waste of time," Maria reported to Amy. "The invasion commander is complaining that his scouts led him to a system with no slaves to capture, and no resources worth taking." Amy smiled grimly at the news. The deception was working exactly as planned. The aliens saw only what humanity wanted them to see, which was a dead world with nothing valuable to offer. The Zephyrians were so confident in their superiority that they never considered the possibility that an entire civilization might be hiding right in front of them. General Greg Patterson sat in his command center 2 miles beneath the Colorado mountains and watched the same tactical displays that Amy was monitoring. Greg had been in charge of Earth's planetary defense for over 60 years, and he had helped design many of the systems that were keeping humanity hidden. The decision to let the aliens land had been his, and he knew that millions of lives depended on getting it right. The first Zephyrian landing craft began descending toward Earth's surface, and Greg felt his hands tighten into fists. Every instinct told him to order the hidden fleet to attack, but the plan required patience. The aliens had to commit their entire force to the invasion before humanity could reveal its true strength. Captain Helen Brooks commanded the dreadnought, Earth's vengeance, from her position in the asteroid belt, and she watched the alien landing craft through her ship's advanced sensors. Helen had been waiting for this day for 30 years, and her crew was ready for battle. The Earth's vengeance carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon, but it remained hidden and silent as the enemy ships passed nearby. The alien landing craft touched down in what had once been New York City, but now appeared to be nothing more than a field of broken concrete and twisted metal. The Zephyrian soldiers that emerged from the ships wore heavy armor and carried weapons that could cut through solid steel. They moved with the confidence of a species that had never been defeated in battle. Lieutenant Danny Price piloted a reconnaissance drone from his hiding place beneath the ruins of the old city and watched the aliens begin their survey of the landing site. The drone was invisible to Zephyrian sensors, and it transmitted everything it saw back to the hidden command centers around the world. Danny had been operating surveillance equipment for 15 years, but he had never seen anything as frightening as the alien soldiers. The Zephyrians moved through the ruins like they owned them, and they showed no respect for the remains of human civilization. They kicked aside pieces of broken statuary and laughed at the primitive architecture they found. To them, humans were just another extinct species that had failed to evolve beyond the limits of their home world. Major Susan Wright led a team of Special Forces soldiers who were positioned less than a mile from the alien landing site. Susan and her team wore advanced camouflage suits that made them completely invisible to both visual and electronic detection. They had been trained for this mission since childhood, and they were ready to strike when the order came. The aliens began setting up their base camp in the ruins of what had once been Central Park, and they worked with the efficiency of a species that had performed this operation many times before. Prefabricated buildings rose from the ground, and defensive positions were established around the perimeter. Within hours, the Zephyrians had created a small city in the heart of the dead zone. Captain Alex Rodriguez commanded the mobile fortress New Olympus from its position among the asteroids, and he watched the alien fleet through sensors that could detect individual soldiers on the planet's surface. The New Olympus was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, and it had taken humans over 1,000 years to complete its construction. The fortress was large enough to house 50,000 people, and it carried weapons that could crack a planet in half. Navigator Beth Daniels plotted the course that would bring the New Olympus into the perfect attack position when the time came. Beth had been calculating orbital mechanics for 20 years, and she knew exactly where every ship in the hidden fleet needed to be when the battle began. The timing had to be perfect, or the entire plan would fail. The Zephyrian survey teams spread out across the Earth's surface and began their detailed analysis of the planet's resources. They found evidence of ancient mining operations and the remains of what appeared to be a primitive industrial civilization. Everything they discovered supported the story that humanity wanted them to believe, which was that Earth had once been inhabited by a species that had destroyed itself thousands of years ago. War Commander Thexvar stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the reports from his ground teams. The planet was even more worthless than his scouts had indicated. There were no valuable minerals in the crust and no signs of advanced technology anywhere on the surface. The only things of interest were some unusual energy readings from deep underground, but those were probably just natural phenomena. Dr. Patricia Murphy worked in a laboratory hidden beneath the ruins of the Smithsonian Museum and monitored the alien biological samples that her teams had collected. Patricia was humanity's leading expert on Zephyrian physiology, and she had been studying captured alien equipment for decades. Her research had revealed weaknesses in Zephyrian technology that would be crucial when the fighting began. The aliens established mining operations in several locations around the planet and began extracting what few resources they could find. The Zephyrians were efficient, but they were also lazy. They had conquered so many worlds that they no longer expected any resistance. Their guards were careless, and their security systems were designed to detect primitive weapons, not the advanced technology that humanity possessed. Commander Tony Clark led Battle Group 7 from his position near Jupiter, and he felt his anger growing as he watched the aliens strip mine the surface of his home world. Tony had been born on Earth before the Great Hiding, and he remembered what the planet had looked like when it was covered with cities and forests. Seeing it reduced to a wasteland for the sake of the deception was almost more than he could bear. The alien fleet remained in orbit around Earth, but many of the smaller ships had been dispatched to other parts of the solar system to search for additional resources. The Zephyrians found nothing of value on Mars or Venus, and their probes detected no signs of life anywhere in the system. As far as they knew, they were completely alone in a dead solar system that barely justified the fuel they had spent to reach it. Amy Foster monitored the holographic projectors that continued to hide the true nature of human civilization, and she knew that the most dangerous part of the plan was yet to come. Eventually, the aliens would dig deep enough or scan thoroughly enough to discover that Earth was not as dead as it appeared. When that happened, humanity would have to act quickly or risk losing everything they had worked to protect. The Zephyrian ground forces numbered in the thousands, and they were establishing permanent bases in major population centers around the world. They moved through the ruins of London and Tokyo and Moscow without any idea that millions of humans were living. Just a few miles, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty and watched the endless darkness of space through the main viewport. His ship had been hiding in the shadow of Saturn for over 300 years now, and Jake had been its captain for the last 50 of those years. The Liberty was not alone in its long watch. Thousands of human warships waited in the cold darkness between the planets, and they had been waiting for a very long time. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the engines and the gentle beeping of the sensor arrays. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes sat at her station monitoring the deep space scanners that reached far beyond the solar system. She had been doing this job for 30 years, and her eyes never stopped watching the screens that showed the vast emptiness between the stars. Every day she looked for the same thing, and every day she hoped she would not find it. "Still nothing on the long-range sensors, Captain," Lisa said without looking away from her screens. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. They all knew what they were waiting for, and they all knew that one day the waiting would end. Jake nodded and walked to the center of the bridge where a large holographic display showed the entire solar system. Tiny blue dots marked the positions of the hidden human fleet. There were so many dots that they looked like stars scattered across the darkness. Each dot represented a ship full of people who had dedicated their lives to this endless vigil. The solar system looked empty to anyone watching from the outside. Earth appeared dead and lifeless with no signs of the civilization that had once covered its surface. The cities were gone, and the oceans looked dark and poisoned. Any alien scouts would see exactly what humanity wanted them to see, which was nothing at all. Admiral Rick Barnes sat in his command center deep beneath the surface of Mars and studied the same holographic display that Jake was looking at. Rick had been in charge of the hidden fleet for over a century, and he remembered when the first ships had taken their positions. Back then, the fleet had only been a few dozen vessels, but now it numbered in the thousands. The plan had been simple in concept, but incredibly difficult to execute. When humanity first detected signs of the approaching alien empire, they had made a choice that would define their species for the next 500,000 years. Instead of fighting or running, they would hide and wait and prepare. They would make their entire civilization disappear and build a fleet that could destroy any enemy when the time came. Rick touched a control, and the display changed to show the outer edge of the solar system where Commander Lisa Hayes operated the monitoring station on Pluto. The station was hidden inside the small moon, and its sensors could detect approaching ships from dozens of light years away. Lisa had reported the first faint signals 3 days ago, and Rick knew that the long wait was almost over. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Empire, and they had been conquering star systems for millions of years. Their scouts had been probing the edges of human space for decades, but they always found the same thing: dead worlds with no signs of life or technology worth taking. The Zephyrians were looking for easy conquests and planets full of resources to strip mine. They had no interest in empty systems with nothing to offer. Jake walked back to his command chair and sat down heavily. He was tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. 50 years of command had aged him beyond his actual years, but he would not give up his position until the mission was complete. Every member of the Hidden Fleet felt the same way. They had all volunteered for this duty, knowing they might never see the end of it. The bridge doors opened, and Lieutenant Sarah Mills entered carrying a data pad. Sarah was young by fleet standards, at only 25 years old, but she had been born on the Liberty and had never known any other life. Her parents had served on the ship before her and their parents before them. The Hidden Fleet was not just a military force, but a society that had grown up in the darkness between the worlds. "Captain, we are receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Barnes," Sarah said as she handed Jake the data pad. "He wants all ship commanders to review the final battle plans." Jake took the pad and scrolled through the information. The battle plans had been refined and updated countless times over the centuries, but the basic strategy remained the same. When the aliens arrived, they would be allowed to land on Earth and begin their conquest. They would see no resistance and no signs that humans still existed. Only when their entire fleet was committed to the invasion would the hidden ships reveal themselves. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 star systems and enslaved dozens of different alien species. Their ships were massive and powerful, and their technology was advanced by the standards of most civilizations. But the Zephyrians had never faced an enemy that had spent 500,000 years preparing for their arrival. Human technology had advanced far beyond anything the aliens could imagine. The ships of the Hidden Fleet were powered by fusion reactors that could run for thousands of years without refueling. Their weapons could punch holes through solid rock from millions of miles away. Their armor was made from materials that did not exist in nature, and their shields could deflect the energy of small stars. Lisa Hayes looked up from her sensor station and felt her heart begin to race. The long-range scanners were picking up massive energy signatures at the edge of the solar system. The signals were still faint, but they were getting stronger every minute. She ran the readings through the computer 3 times to make sure she was not making a mistake. "Captain," she called out, and her voice was louder than she intended. "I have multiple contacts approaching from Galactic North. Estimate arrival in 72 hours. Jake stood up quickly and moved to her station. The sensor readings were clear and unmistakable. Dozens of large ships were moving toward the solar system at high speed. After 500,000 years of waiting, the Zephyrian Empire had finally arrived. "Send the alert to all ships," Jake ordered. "Use the special frequency that bypasses normal communications. Every commander needs to know that the day we have been preparing for is here." Sarah Mills activated the emergency communication system, and within minutes every ship in the Hidden Fleet received the message. On Mars, Admiral Barnes smiled grimly as he read the report. On the monitoring station at Pluto, Commander Hayes began the final preparations that would hide all traces of human activity from the approaching aliens. The Zephyrian fleet consisted of over 200 ships, including massive dreadnoughts and smaller escort vessels. War Commander Thexvar led the invasion force from his flagship, and he was confident that this would be another easy conquest. The scouts had reported that Earth was a dead world with no defenses and no population worth enslaving. As the alien ships drew closer to Earth, the hidden human fleet remained perfectly still and silent. Their advanced cloaking systems made them invisible to any scanner the Zephyrians possessed. To the aliens, the solar system appeared completely empty except for the lifeless planets orbiting an ordinary yellow star. Jake Morrison watched the tactical display as the alien fleet approached, and he felt a mixture of fear and excitement. Everything humanity had worked for during the past 500,000 years would be decided in the next few days. Either the plan would succeed and Earth would be saved, or the hidden fleet would be destroyed and humanity would face extinction. The waiting was almost over.